And for our first presentation, I would like to introduce Max Leyf. He is speaking on face-to-face with invisible honeybees. Let's welcome Max.
We are the bees of the invisible. Passionately, we plunder the honey of the visible in order to gather it in the great golden hive of the invisible. These are the words of the poet, writer Mario Rilke in a letter to his friend in 1925. It has been a life dream of mine to write a book, and in August of last year, I had achieved this dream. Almost. I had composed, collected, and refined a book that addressed what I take to be the most important question, the most timeless and most timely question. What does it mean to be a human being? But my own lofty estimation of this book's content would not allow me to name it untitled or anonymous. As the Alaskan summer began to end, and as I began to pack up for my return to San Francisco, to begin my last year in the PCC master's program, I found myself at just such an impasse. I had written a book, and I had nothing to call it. It was in this moment of crisis that these words of Rilke descended on my infertile mind, like one of those very gold striped priestesses of Demeter itself alighting on a sunflower. Michelle. Transformed? Yes. For our task is to stamp this provisional, perishing earth into ourselves so deeply, so painfully, so truly, that its being may rise again invisibly in us as spirit. We are the bees of the invisible. Passionately, we plunder the honey of the visible in order to gather it in the great golden hive of the invisible. It struck me that Rilke's words contained the germ of my entire project. Obviously, as human beings, we have a part to play in the Earth community, but we cannot possibly know what that part is until we know what the human being is. The challenges that we face today, climate change, war in Syria, poverty in the Tenderloin district outside our front door of this building in downtown San Francisco, these challenges emerge precisely as symptoms that we have forgotten our role as human beings. When we know how to listen, we can hear in these symptoms the stern voice of angels admonishing us to remember ourselves, to know ourselves. Crises speak with the tongues of angels to relay inconvenient truths. One could safely conclude that today the world is sending choirs of messengers for our edification. How can human beings reestablish integration in a world whose balance we have disrupted? The chorus of primeval wisdom intones the answer with a clarity undiminished by the ages. Gnotoi seuton, human, know thyself. This injunction from the oracle at Delphi is as ancient as history, and never before has it been valued less and needed more. Honeybees of the Invisible is foremost an attempt to understand this injunction and its meaning for our time. Rilke writes that we are bees of the invisible. What is our honey? What is our original gift as human beings? I hope that by the end of this talk, together, we may have lived into the answer. The honeybee gathers seasonal nectar, reciprocally plundering and pollinating the lily, the apple blossom, the dandelion. These buzzing alchemists of nature then transmute this seasonal nectar into imperishable liquid gold. The temporary becomes timeless. As Rilke indicates, in this task, we can be their disciples. What the honeybee accomplishes in nature, the human being is to accomplish in spirit. For the human being, the great work consists in the sacred distillation of our worldly experience into its imperishable tincture, which is to say, its spirit, its meaning, its quintessence. The door through which fleeting phenomena re-enter eternity is in the human soul. Consider the rosebush in winter. To my outer eye, the rosebush reveals only a bleak and thorny exterior. In this sense, the rosebush and all of nature hides its entire past and future in phenomenal enchantment, enchantment in plain sight. But when I know it as a rosebush, a cluster of gray-brown knotted thorns becomes pregnant with invisible sleeping beauty. A secret promise waiting only for the proper season to unfold its hidden mystery. In this way, the human being is like a spiritual mirror, in whose reflection a rosebush becomes the rosebush. Appearance becomes essence. The outer world provides occasion only for what is fleeting. Nature depends on the theater of the human soul to provide venue for her eternal aspect. Indeed, it is in this reflection that a transient phenomenon may become a thing of beauty and a joy forever. One cannot expect honey from a milking cow, and neither is it to be recommended that one try to milk a honeybee. All creatures perform a sacred and irreplaceable task in nature, and no other creature besides the human being can provide the rosebush with a sanctuary in which to reveal its eternal inner aspect as a symbol of immortal beauty. The human being is to be the collector of spiritual nectar and the alchemist of invisible honey. Our nectar is outer experience, and our honey is inner meaning. Only the human being can behold in nature a work of art, or as a marvel of incarnate wisdom. This act is to gather the dew of truth and the nectar of beauty from the sense world to return it to the great golden hive of the invisible. In passing, one may notice that a sip from the cup of this spiritual nectar does not empty the cup, but fills it. In this way, extraction of spiritual resources has nothing in common with the associations that this phrase might invite today. Obviously, a survey of the Earth from cosmic space, a view of the oil rigs, the skyscrapers, the highway traffic. A survey from cosmic space would reveal the trappings of a species more akin to mosquitoes or termites than the honeybees of the invisible that Rilke describes. Thus, the human being with the highest potential often falls the lowest and exploits nature for his own insatiable craving. Other creatures are blameless in this regard. A honeybee does not see in the sunrise the moving image of eternal truth and beauty, but neither does it pillage the earth for meaningless satisfaction of a rapacious instinct for unbridled consumerism. One might object that if the honeybee were to be granted dominion over all creatures of the earth, that it might actually prove more ruthlessly materialistic than the human being. This is unlikely, though one must concede that it is not logically impossible. Nevertheless, one must also concede that this question conveniently evades our grasp of moral responsibility by sending us in chimerical pursuit of a counterfactual decoy. In this way, it defers our attention from the true heart of the issue. The most important point is the freedom of the human being. Human beings are free to do otherwise, to counteract basic instincts for consumerism, tribalism, and self-preservation. This spiritual freedom is probably the most sacred possession of the human soul, because in freedom is the possibility, latent, the possibility for spiritual love. Freedom is the esoteric meaning of Prometheus's fire, and love is like the rose blossom that, once called forth by the heat and light, appears with the return of spring. Midwinter spring is its own season, writes T.S. Eliot, to begin the last of his 4 quartets, and he ends the work with the following lines. Now, when the tongues of flame are folded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. This is really the heart of our challenge today. Like the fire of physics, and like the fire of the sun, the secret fire of freedom can wreak manifold destruction. Indeed, this aspect of fire is precisely what burned our bridge from Eden in the first place, and placed at the gates the cherubim with the flaming sword. The tree, wrote St. Augustine, which had brought about the fall and the loss of paradise, shall be our instrument of redemption. Augustine is, of course, referring to the Genesis creation story and the tasting from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Severance from nature is also freedom from nature, and freedom from nature means that we could love nature, but also injure her. My finger does not love my hand, but neither can it engineer any injury against it. In this way, it would be meaningless to speak of spiritual love so long as the human being remained in the state of pre-reflective original participation in the womb of nature. The tree, which had brought about the fall and the loss of paradise, shall be the instrument of redemption. What is this redemption? The Chorus Mysticus declares the following lines at the end of Goethe's Faust. Everything transient is but a metaphor. Actually, the word in German is Gleichnis, which literally means likeness. It is not uncommon to find this word translated into English not as metaphor, but as parable. Until now, we have considered transient experience as a metaphor, as when we imagined the appearance of the rose and contrasted this to the being of the rose. So while we have first considered how everything transient may become a metaphor for eternal truth and beauty, here we can consider everything transient as a parable to teach us goodness. Everything in the world is fleeting, and the soil to sustain new life is provided only by the continual dying of the old. Everything offers itself to be trodden underfoot, and we live only by the grace of nature's loving sacrifice. In this way, all of life becomes a parable to teach us goodness, selflessness, love. With this point, I have transitioned into a subject matter so full of meaning that my cup runneth over into a second book. If honeybees of the invisible sought to establish that human beings are honeybees of meaning, but now Face to Face explores the highest meaning of all, love. I am indebted to Rilke for the title of the first book, and for the second book I am indebted to St. Paul. In particular, the title comes from his famous letter to the church at Corinth. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as I am known. Love, in St. Paul's meaning, is a question of relationship. And it is a question of a specific quality of relationship, namely, relating to another on his or her own terms, rather than through the glass of our own self-concern. Love is one thing that cannot be possessed. Love is gained only in the giving it away. To meet one another face to face is perhaps a distant ideal, but it strikes me that it may be the most important ideal in the world today. I wrote most of the content of this book in the months leading up to the presidential election in November. During that time, it became more obvious every day that we never meet one another face to face, but only through the reflection of labels, prejudices, preconceptions, which is to say, through a glass, darkly. This book was an attempt to overcome and to understand and overcome this fragmentation. Let us again invite the image of the rosebush into our mind's eye, and then inquire, where is the rose in January? It's nowhere in manifest space. This is precisely the point. Instead, the rose in full flower hovers outside of space as an idea, a potential waiting to be born. This incarnation into space and time depends on the necessary conditions of spring rain and summer sun, the marriage of fire and water. If the rose should bloom, the sun and the rain did not cause the rose to bloom. They were, however, necessary conditions for its appearance. The true and final cause was the spiritual germ, the logos, the invisible idea, only waiting for the proper season to be made manifest. So likewise, but now face to face, affirms love as the sublime potential waiting to incarnate into the heart of humankind. It is like the invisible rose in winter, imminent, eminent, imminent. It is there but unmanifest, invisible, hiding behind space in a firmament of simultaneous time. Indeed, love awaits only that we, as human beings, fulfill the conditions for its birth. This is the alchemical wedding, the marriage of fire and water, the sun and the moon, pater eos est sol, mater eos est luna, the wedding of will and wisdom, the outer and the inner, Osiris and Isis, the sunlight of freedom with the rain of understanding. My inspiration behind these books and behind this talk today is to offer my small contribution towards this great work of humankind upon the earth. Thank you. Can I take any questions from the audience? Dr. Tarnas, please.
I can't say enough about how eloquent that was, and drawing on so many sources, more than Rilke and Augustine and Paul and the ones that you mentioned. You packed it in there with so many other philosophers and poets and people who are part of. Thanks. Testing 1, 2, 3. People who have been part of our learning community, invisible members, the teachers. It's just you did just a great job, and I look forward to reading because of its density, its poetic intensity. I look forward to reading it, to contemplate it even more. Just really, just splendid. I'd like to have a conversation with you at some point, because it's something I've often struggled with, and that is that sense that only the human has those qualities that you unpacked throughout your talk. And I'm inclined to, I completely am at one with the idea of that bivalent responsibility that goes with the great privilege of symbolic consciousness and the destructiveness that is also accompanied it. But I'm wondering if we sometimes anthropocentric. I'm anthropocentric as well. I think there's ways of being anthropocentric in a cosmocentric way, but I think I just want to talk to you sometime about whether there's ways in which we can't really say what we humans alone can do, whether there may be other beings that also have remarkable capacities in this way. Whether, for example, even the lion sees eternity when it's looking out on the savannah. I just don't know whether the bee doesn't see the eternal archetype in the flower that it's entered into. I just don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just make a brief response. This is, of course, this conversation could be, this could be the conversation. This could go on. I would just say, what's most interesting to me is less speculation about the capacities of other creatures and more stepping into our potential as human beings. I could imagine, speaking of anthropocentrism, this picture of the human being in the center. What I've tried to present is a sort of a model in which the human being, or maybe it's best to imagine it as a sort of hierarchy, and the human being is the top of this hierarchy. The reason the human being is the top of this hierarchy is this is a hierarchy of symbolic consciousness or meaning, art. If this were a hierarchy of being an apex predator on the savannah or making honey, this would the human being could not expect to occupy that position. I entirely feel it's possible that the lion sees eternity on the savannah, or the honeybee in the sunset and sunrise. This is an incredible contemplation. Another question? Thea?
I temporarily entered into a romantic dream state, listening to you.
It's Rilke.
Yeah, thank you.
Every
And
word.
I think that you've been cultivating a very beautiful and fine honey in your own life. And it's really an honor to be in your presence. For you to share that, it's rich, it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
You're incredibly poetic. And I've spent little time with you, so this is one of my first lenses into your psyche. And it's a gift.
I feel this is like kind of Rilke's, the nectar of poets, that if I benefit, it's because of their nectar, but I thank you. Yeah.
And your attentiveness and dedication to the depth of understanding is clear in your work. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing this as a gift to us. And you're just incredibly poetic and a beautiful speaker and writer, so thank you.
Wow, thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you so much, man.